Hi, I'm Bill Arnold. Thank you for listening to this podcast. There are many more podcasts available at myfaithradio.com. Your support makes this possible. Thank you. Hi, this is Bill. I thought this interview was so good, I wanted you to hear it again. So enjoy. And a warm welcome to the afternoon show. I'm Bill Arnold, and we're going to continue talking about the wonderful season we're in, Advent and Christmas. And I can't think of anyone I'd rather do it with than Ace Collins, who does this for me once or twice every year, and I look forward to it all year long because it is such a joy. He's written a couple of books, the stories behind the great traditions of Christmas and the stories behind the great hymns of Christmas. And this little book of his, you're going to love having it on your coffee table. Almost when you pull out your decorations every Christmas, this should just be part of the decorations that come out, and it can go on your coffee table. It's a perfect gift to really help celebrate with spiritual insights some of the captivating legends and stories of the Christmas season. And it really brings depth to some of the traditions that you've celebrated your whole life, and you've never really understood the traditions or how they came about. And it's a great conversation starter with friends and relatives when they come over to your house. But always glad to have Ace on. Ace has written over 100 books. I don't know what he does in his spare time, but I don't bother to ask. Ace, welcome to the show.
It's great to be with you. And what a great day to talk about Christmas traditions and music. I mean, Brenda Lee has racked up #1 for the second week in a row with Rockin' Around the Christmas Tree. And imagine if, for those of you who think waiting for Christmas takes a long time, 1958 was when that song was recorded, and 2023 is when it went #1 for the very first time. I mean, that's waiting a long time for a Christmas present. And knowing Brenda the way I do, and knowing that she cried when she found out she went #1 last week and hung on this week, it is so much fun because, you talk about the Christmas books I've written. 3 of them have been on Christmas music, and the stories behind the greatest hits of Christmas, when I wrote it in 2005, 2006, I dedicated it to Brenda Lee because she is such a joyful, upbeat, happy human being. As a matter of fact, one of the great traditions of Christmas is caroling, and Brenda's hilarious because her kids and grandkids and great-grandkids cannot open presents until they've all gotten in their various cars and driven around the neighborhoods and caroling. So imagine looking out your window and seeing Rock and Roll Hall of Famer Brenda Lee, who currently has the #1 hit in the country, caroling to you on Christmas Eve.
Yeah. Ace, before we start, I just want to, Wyatt and I both want to extend our sympathy, and I want all of our listeners to know that you, a month ago, lost your dear wife, Kathy, and we, both Wyatt and I, watched a portion of the service that was online and available. And I got to tell you, it was just heart-wrenching and beautiful, and what a beautiful tribute. And you were so masterful and so loving. And just to think that you're back on the air with me a month after losing your wife is just amazing. And it just means so much to us. And I just want you to know how sorry I am that you lost your beloved.
This will no doubt be the most difficult Christmas season of my life, having written 12 or 14 Christmas books and everything else, and everybody comes to me for Christmas stories and the Christmas spirit. But as hard and difficult as it is when you lose somebody who just loved Christmas the way that Kathy did, you continue to look for the joy in the season. Mm-hmm. Now, that's more difficult in my case. And for those of you who are out there, I've been sharing some thoughts on going through the grieving process on one of my Facebook pages. But it's not an easy thing to do. It's particularly a difficult thing to do at this time of year. But if you file it away, if you put it away, if you basically package that joy up and stick it in a closet somewhere, then you're dishonoring not only everything that Christmas stands for, you're also dishonoring the loved one who loved Christmas so much and who shared that joy so much. Mm. So, when you're talking about these traditions, Christmas traditions and Christmas songs are a time machine. They're unlike anything else in the world. We never have another time of the year in which things come back universally to all of us and bring back fresh memories of things that happened 30 or 40 or 50, 60 years ago, and we can remember them in detail because of hearing a song or seeing a certain tradition, like a blue light on the Christmas tree always reminds me of my grandmother who only had blue lights on her trees, and there was a reason for that. Hearing a specific song, like at the Carpenters' Christmas song, reminds me of my wife. That was her favorite Christmas song. Sing a cantata reminds me of different times in my life that I ever sang in them or watched Kathy or some of my other relatives singing them. There's no time that takes us back to those moments and makes them as fresh as Christmas is. So even if you've lost a loved one during this time, you also reattach yourself to that loved one when you hear certain songs or embrace certain traditions. It doesn't make the pain go away, but it does awaken you to the fact that you need to be a part of sharing the same joy, the same magic, the same spirit of the season that those who went before you shared. And so in this particular case, it might be a little more difficult, but perhaps because it's more difficult in the long run, and I won't know this till after Christmas is over, it also might be more rewarding because you've had to reach deep, pull from the depth of all of your emotions, and then to latch on to memories that are special. As a matter of fact, what I'm doing this year is I'm actually, whenever a memory comes back of Christmas or other times of my life, I'm actually writing it down. And I don't want to lose those memories. So I'm writing them down so that I remember. Because when you're raw, like you are right now, you remember those memories in much greater detail than you do when you are separated by months or even years from them. So I think it's important to journal, which is one of the things that I'm doing, and sharing bits and pieces of those journals on Facebook. People tell me they're sharing them a lot and telling me it's helping. You know, I didn't want to do it. And then I had a couple of my friends who are counselors said, you really need to share what you're thinking and what you're feeling because it's important. And so we're doing it. But, you know, Kathy unexpectedly died on November 5th. That was a Sunday afternoon at 3. Within 2 hours and 45 minutes, college kids were at my house for Sunday night home group. We feed between 50 and 75 college kids every Sunday night. The food was already ready. We were ready for it.
Wow.
Kathy's death was not expected. And we went ahead and had it and didn't tell them what had happened until after it was all over. We didn't want to ruin the joy and the fun they had each and every Sunday night at this house by dropping anything unexpected. Now, because she was one of many of their professors, we knew that they would find out the next day via email, and we thought that was unfair. So that night we shared with them what had happened and got together and mourned some, got together and talked some, but we went forward. And for those out there who have lost loved ones, each experience is different. Mine is going to be different than yours. The thing that I think we need to do, if you are one of those, is find somebody you trust and talk to them. It doesn't have to be a counselor. It can be a friend, somebody who'll be honest with you and who wants to listen. Share those memories. And if you are not someone who's lost someone, but you know someone who's lost loved ones, don't say how you doing or how you feeling. Instead, walk up and just talk to them and say, man, I can't imagine what you're going through. That opens up the door for them to talk to you and share with you, and getting those emotions out and sharing how they really feel and being there for them to listen to that, and then maybe share some memories of that loved one with them as well, is a part of the healing process. And I think too many of us who have never been in a situation of losing someone back off and give that person time because we don't know what to say. Knowing what to say is not important. It's knowing how to listen and respond that is important. And so think about that. Don't try to say, I know how you feel. You don't. Instead, open it up and let them tell you how they feel, which is pretty much what I've just done.
Yeah, you did it beautifully, really, Ace. Ace Collins is my guest. and his wife, Dr. Kathy Collins, just passed away November 5th. And I'll tell you the 2-second conversation I had with myself in my head when I heard the news. I thought, oh, well, maybe Ace won't want to come on the show this year. And in the second, I said to myself, no, it's Ace Collins. He's coming on the show.
Well, we did the home group that night. We've done the home group ever since. I have not missed an event those college kids have been in. Yeah. You've got to continue to go out and do things you can't withdraw from life. No. If you do, then it's a disservice to the person who you were so active in life with.
Yeah, you're a remarkable man. So, Ace, thank you for that, sharing that. That's beautiful. When you had mentioned that your grandma only liked blue lights, can you talk a little bit about the reason behind that and the colors of Christmas?
Yeah, the colors of Christmas. We don't really think about the colors of Christmas today, but they were very important in history. Green, and we'll talk about trees later, but green represents an evergreen, something that never dies. So green represented everlasting light. If you look at a white light, or that light represented the light that came into the world, the pure light that came into the world when Christ came into the world. These were very important to people back in the 14, 15, 1600s, in the Middle and Dark Ages, these symbols of light. Purple represented royalty, and of course Christ was the King of Kings, the Prince of Peace. And so to them, if they had a purple bow on something, it was representative of that. Red represented the blood of Christ that flowed from the cross, and the redemptive blood of Christ. And so that was important because that's an important element of Christ's life. And then blue represented love. And my grandmother always decked her trees out with blue lights to represent the love that she felt being a Christian from a God that she obviously worshiped, and a Savior that she believed in, but also the love that she transferred to her family each and every year through gifts and through presents and through decorations and through making Christmas very, very special. So of the 9 full-size trees, we have 9 trees that are over 7 feet in our house that are decorated. One of them is always decorated with blue lights to remind me of my grandmother. And when I see those lights, man, I can smell the aromas coming from the kitchen for that Christmas meal. My grandmother also, by the way, always made enough for 3 or 4 more. And when she found out, our family was big and they came in, but when she found out that there were people whose kids couldn't come in that year for Christmas, or who had lost someone, so they wouldn't anybody Christmas to be there for Christmas dinner, she invited those people all in as well, and she always had extra presents underneath the tree for the guests that she brought in.
Mm-hmm. Now, Ace, I don't know if I get you a second time or not in December. I think Wyatt had said that there's
you do, yeah.
Oh,
mm-hmm.
good.
You do next week, yeah.
Good, because I didn't know how I was going to pace myself today, because both of your Christmas books, the story behind the best loved songs of Christmas and the stories behind some of the traditions, they're both such wonderful books.
Well, and if you love the music, because there weren't enough pages to get all the stories behind the best loved songs of Christmas in the first book, there's another bestseller called More Stories Behind the Best Loved Songs of Christmas. Then they asked me to do another one after that became a bestseller as well, which was Stories Behind the Greatest Hits of Christmas. And so all of those 3 books are books that have become kind of traditional books. A lot of them are read during cantatas and during large orchestra performances. And I hear from people all over the country who say, well, they're using your book with such and such an orchestra in Atlanta or San Antonio or places like that. And it's always a thrill to find out that your work is not only being enjoyed by individuals who are reading it, but it's being shared by great and large groups as well. I've been in front of many orchestras telling these stories before, and it's just, it's a part. It is, if you know the story about why you're doing something, if you know initially where the Christmas tree came from and why we use it, and what it stood for back then and what it can stand for today. If you knew that the first 100,000 years of the church or more, most times if you went to church, you saw Christmas spelled Xmas. And if you know the reason behind that, you can actually turn that around. And if you see an Xmas and show them how that actually stands for Christ at Christmas, it's not taking Christ out of Christmas. And all of those different things, I think, help us make Christmas more meaningful, not for ourselves, and sharing those things makes Christmas much more meaningful for someone else.
Mm-hmm. Ace Collins is my guest. You can learn more about him at acecollins.com. We're going to continue to talk about the stories behind not only some of the great traditions of Christmas, but the stories behind the songs and hymns of Christmas. So if you have a particular favorite you would love the history on, I don't think you're going to be able to stump Ace. So you can send it over to 877-933-2484. We'll be right back. Hello, cheerful givers. It is always amazing that you live so intentionally and give so sacrificially and are so generous in all that you do, whether it's financial gifts or it's your time and talents and resources God has given you. You are making an incredible difference for the kingdom. And kingdom advances through prayer and giving. And we don't want to have the year end without inviting you to make that end of the year tax deductible gift to help support Faith Radio. Your gift right now keeps us spreading the good news in front of a lot of people. So thank you for giving by clicking the link in the show notes or giving at myfaithradio.com. Thank you so much. Hi, this is Bill. I thought this interview was so good, I wanted you to hear it again. So enjoy. So glad to be back with Ace Collins. We're talking about Christmas songs, traditions, and we're going to continue this discussion. If you've got a favorite Christmas song, you'd like to know the history on it, I think Ace will probably handle it for you. 877-933-2484. Now, Ace, the Hallelujah Chorus, is that like the most powerful piece of music ever written?
I think how powerful it is going to be based on your personal perception. I think that it is perhaps of all of what I consider classical music that's out there, particularly oratorios, the Hallelujah Chorus is absolutely one of the most moving pieces of music ever written. It was written by, George Handel. It was written, about 300-400 years ago by a man who literally was the Elvis of his time. And when you look at Handel and you think about him and think about what a superstar he was, you don't understand that when he wrote this song, he was past his fame. Mm-hmm. He's one of those guys you walked up to and say, "Hey, didn't you used to be George Handel?" Mm-hmm. And I have people in the entertainment business who talk to me about that all the time. They go into a store and they haven't had a hit for 20 years and they say, "Gosh, didn't you used to be so-and-so?" Well, that's that. Handel was not only that, he was also broke. He was up to his ears in debt. He was afraid to answer the door of the little bitty shack he lived in, afraid it was going to be somebody who would drag him off to a debtor's prison. He got a letter one day from a friend of his named Jennings, who was eccentric. I mean, nobody listened to him because his ideas were too wacky. And he suggested to Handel to write an oratorio about the coming of the Messiah and base it all on Old Testament scripture. And he even cited the scripture. Oratorios were out of style. So Handel was 20 years too late for this idea. But he had nothing else to do. So for the next 17 days, he actually wrote it. And then a few weeks later, got an invitation to go to Ireland to lead a small group of singers and musicians to raise money for a charity hospital. He went as much to escape the debtors as he did to go and appear somewhere. There wasn't much money in it, but there was more in it than he was going to have if he had stayed home. He got there and performed the Messiah the very first time. And the reception was so good, it got written up in London newspapers. So when he came back from London, suddenly everybody wanted to see what Handel had written again. And he performed this in one of the 4 or 5 performances into it. The King of England, James, arrived and actually, when he got to the part of the Hallelujah Chorus, stood up. And of course, when the king stands up, everybody stands up. And so they all stood up And that became one of the traditions. It saved Handel's life, literally. I mean, he was sick. He was aging quickly. He had almost lost his eyesight. It made him a star again.
Wow.
And he once again became the star. But what it also did was gave us a piece of music that 40, 50 years later was being performed at Easter and continued to be performed at Easter for decades to raise money for charity. Well, it was so successful at Easter, they knew that people were even more generous at Christmas, and they moved it to Christmas about 50 years ago. And ever since that time, it has become a Christmas tradition, even though technically Handel never intended it to be a Christmas piece. He saw it more as an Easter piece. And that we continue to stand at the Hallelujah Chorus. I think the greatest lesson in all this is Handel was a used up guy who everybody had written off and forgotten about. He literally was, because he was broke and starving, one of the least of these that Christ talked about in Matthew 25, 35 through 40. And yet the least of these guy, Handel, wrote a piece of music that has raised more money at Christmas for people who really are the least of these than any other piece of music ever composed.
It's just fantastic. Ace, I think I've seen the placard outside the church in Ireland. I think I took a picture of it where it was performed for the very first time.
Yeah, and it's just, it's unfathomable how things work. And that's why you have to believe there's a divine touch on these things to happen. I mean, you go back a little over 200 years and you've got a priest who's in a panic on Christmas Eve in a little town in Austria, Obendorf. And he's in a panic because the organ won't work, and he's built his entire Christmas Eve Mass around the organ. Now, you would think he would adapt, but this is a very young priest, and this is the first time he's ever been in charge of a Christmas Eve service. And he bases it on music, and the organ will not play. And he runs across town in the snow to his best friend. His best friend is a school teacher. And he talks to the school teacher in a panic, and you can just hear him going, you can just hear him rattling, going, what am I going to do? And the school teacher calms him down and says, okay, I'll play guitar. And the priest explains, Joseph Moore was the priest, and he explains, this stuff can't be played with a guitar. It has to be played with an organ. And that's when Gruber said, okay, let's come up with something else. So Franz Gruber calmed him down and said, why don't we write something? And that's when Moore remembered that for 3 years before, he had visited one of his uncles and walked through a forest on a cold winter's night and came back and sat down and wrote a poem called Stille Nacht. He actually went back to his office and found that poem. How many of us can write something once, put it away, and find it 3 years later?
Yeah.
He did. He gave it to Gruber, who wrote music for it. And that night, Stille Nacht, Heilige Nacht, or Silent Night as we know it, became the song that saved the Christmas Eve service in this Obendorf, Austria church. Well, we wouldn't know that song today, except somebody had to come and fix the organ. And by the way, mice didn't eat the bellows. You've seen that and heard that all your life. No, it was just an old organ. And when the guy came by to fix the organ, he said, hey, what'd you do for music on Christmas Eve? The priest picked up and played Silent Night for the man who wrote down the lyrics and the melody. And 30 years later, this priest, who's pretty much forgotten about this song, now is a middle-aged man. He is walking through a city, I believe it was Cologne, Germany, and he hears his song coming from a cathedral. He walks in to find out what happened. How did they know Silent Night? And over time, he discovers that the guy who fixed the organ became the Johnny Appleseed of Silent Night and taught it to everyone that he knew. And by the time the priest heard it from the cathedral, it was known all over the world and was the most popular carol even in America.
Wow.
And had been translated into countless languages and has become literally the Jesus loves me of all Christmas songs. Everybody knew it. Everybody sang it. And that is another one of those great miracles of Christmas, that this song that was a stopgap measure to save a service at this little tiny church ended up becoming not the best-selling Christmas song of all time, but the most sung Christmas song of all time. And by the way, what was the name of the church in Obendorf, Austria? St. Nicholas.
Wow. Can't make this stuff up, can you?
No, you can't. No.
I love Silent Night. I don't think I can get through that without tears welling up in my face. It's just so gorgeous.
Yeah, one of the top 10 recordings that last time I checked at Christmas is Silent Night.
Yeah.
Initially, Bing Crosby had a #1 hit on it. The best-selling version of Silent Night of all time is Barbra Streisand's.
Wow. That's fantastic. Ace Collins is my guest. If you have a question about a song or a tradition of Christmas, I bet Ace will know the history on it. You can send a text over to us. The number is 877-933-2484. Here's a question, Ace. Is it accurate to say that God rest ye merry gentlemen can be translated God keep you strong, gentlemen?
It's not inaccurate to say it that way.
Okay.
No. I mean, in truth, God rest you merry gentlemen confused me as a child. It's probably the reason I wrote all these books, is that song kind of made me question why God would want happy people to sleep. It was written about 500 or 600 years ago in England, and the word rest meant back then make or keep. And so if you substitute make or keep for rest, you get God make you merry gentlemen, and it makes a whole lot more sense. But I got some information from the National Archives through a university I was doing research on when I did the book that also pointed out that Mary 600-700 years ago also had a meaning that more than just happy. You know, words mean more than just one meaning if you get to various countries. And then if you notice, the British say Happy Christmas to each other. They rarely say Merry Christmas. And Mary also meant mighty or great. And it could mean strong in that respect as well. And so we probably should be singing it, God make you mighty gentlemen, let nothing you say. Remember Christ your Savior was born on Christmas Day. It has much more meaning that way. And we also have to remember that Robin Hood and his merry men were not necessarily happy guys that were out in a wet forest fighting a powerful enemy, but they were mighty. They were great. And so the old English weren't looking at a bunch of guys that laughed like they did in the Errol Flynn movie and that great movie, The Adventures of Robin Hood in 1938. Mm-hmm. But they were looking at people who were so powerful they were overthrowing, you know, the most powerful armed force in the world at that time. So eat, drink, and be mighty. God make you mighty gentlemen, and Robin Hood and his mighty men is probably how we should be looking at all those things.
Mm-hmm. Ace Collins is my guest. Ace, a question came in about the name of the priest. Is it Father Robert Moore?
Joseph
Moore, M-O-O-R-E. Do you imagine?
M-O-H. I think it's I'd have to go back and check. It may have an H in it.
I think you're right. I think it's M-O-H-R.
Yeah, I think it's M-O-H-R.
Yeah.
It's like the actor Gerald Moore from the 1950s and 60s.
Yeah.
And he was in his early 20s. I think he was about 18 or 19 when he wrote the poem.
Wow.
I'm just amazed he could find the poem.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, after all those years, and he's moved a couple of times, that he could actually knew where to go back and find that poem is you know, there's several levels of miracle in that story, and that's one of those miracles as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, Father Moore gave us Silent Night and had no idea it had spread all over the globe.
I love that story. All right, we're going to take a little break. We'll come back. Lots more with Ace Collins. You can learn more about Ace at acecollins.com, and he's written so many amazing books. He's over 100 books he's authored. And right now we're talking about some of the great traditions behind Christmas and also some of the great Christmas songs. So if you've got a question about the history behind a tradition or a song, you can text it over 877-933-2484. We'll be right back. Hi, this is Bill. I thought this interview was so good, I wanted you to hear it again. So enjoy.
It's the afternoon show with Bill Arnold. Prime time, drive time. Let's get it started. Jump in your car. Yeah. What's for dinner? Hey. It's the afternoon show with Bill Arnold.
I look forward every December to talking to Ace Collins and we are chatting about traditions regarding Christmas and also Christmas songs. He's written a number of books, over 100, and about how many regarding Christmas? Ace, are you around 12 in that department?
I think 12 or 13. We have a new Christmas children's book out this year about a bear that has insomnia and can't hibernate, and it is the first bear to ever experience Christmas.
Interesting.
And so Grady Bear, the only bear that stayed awake for Christmas, has gotten incredible reviews, and it's a story I wrote many years ago just for my wife's elementary school class at the time, but long before she became a college professor. And she encouraged me last year to, hey, you need to actually publish Grady, and it's my favorite thing you've ever done. So the timing is unique, obviously, with what had happened, but Grady is out, and I think Grady's a children's book, but it works for adults.
Of course
the
it
adults
does, yeah.
that kept it ended up keeping it and then buying another one for their kids or grandkids. So
Yeah.
it's a special book. You can go to Amazon and read about it and find it. But it's Grady Bear is the name of it, and it's one of the most creative things I probably have ever done. And so, yeah, so it joins the book of It joins the novels and then the nonfiction books I've written about Christmas now.
The children's book reminds me of a story from your traditions of Christmas, which is powerful because, and I'm if this is too sensitive to bring this up, given the fact your wife Kathy just passed away last November 5th, but the dad who had a wife who was ill,
Yeah.
and he
Bob May.
Bob
May.
May. If you would tell
Yeah,
the Bob May story, this just takes me down.
I mean, it's Thanksgiving during the Depression, and there's a man who is living in essentially a two-room apartment with his wife and his small child. It's on the wrong side of the tracks in Chicago. It's a cold night, and he's reading a newspaper, and his 4-year-old daughter crawls up in his lap and literally breaks his heart with the words, "Why can't my mommy be like all the other mommies in the world?" And Bob looks across at his wife, Evelyn, who's in bed, and she has had cancer for years, and the child has never known her mother healthy. So she's never been taken to the park to play or taken to church or shopping by her mother. It's also why they live in such a low-rent neighborhood, is because in this tenement, because all the money has gone to, the treatment. Well, Bob pulls his daughter, Barbara, up into his lap and invents a story. And the story he invents, the lead character has a combination of his personality and his wife's personality in it. And so the little girl liked it so much, she started asking for it every night. And Bob, who had no money for a Christmas present for his daughter, stayed up late. He was a copywriter and a graphic artist, and he stayed up late fleshing out the story and creating drawings to go with it. Well, his wife, Evelyn, dies right before Christmas, but he gives the book that he has written to his daughter anyway. And the people who are coming by to talk to the family and mourn with the family, if you will, they see the book. And Evelyn tells them all about it. And one of those there said, you really need to read the book at the company New Year's Eve party. And he's pressed to do it, and he does it. And the CEO of the company comes to him and says, we want to buy your rights to your book. And they do. And for the next 6, 7, 8 years, every child that sits in Santa's lap in these company stores gets an opportunity to get a copy of Bob's book. Well, a major publisher right after World War II comes to them, the company, and says, hey, we want to publish your book. And they give the rights back to Bob May. And by 1946, Bob May has the best-selling children's book in the world. Well, he's remarried. His wife, after a couple of years after his wife died, he remarried another woman, and her brother-in-law, his brother-in-law now is a guy named Johnny Marks, who's a jingle writer. And Johnny and Bob get together and they write a song. And they take it to Bing Crosby because he's had 4 major Christmas hits. Bing turns it down. They take it to Dinah Short, who's looking for a Christmas hit, and she turns it down. And then they take it to Bob Hope, who also turns it down. Now, Bob really wanted a Christmas hit because his best friend Bing had all these hits. And they took it to another singer-actor as well, who turned it down. But his wife heard the demo record and said, Gene Autry, you got to cut the record about the reindeer no one will play with. And Gene cut it as a B-side on a great song as the A-side called If It Doesn't Snow This Christmas. Well, all the disc jockeys flipped the B-side, and suddenly the best-selling record in the country was Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. And for many years, it was the second highest-selling Christmas record of all time behind Bing Crosby's White Christmas. Mariah Carey has probably pushed it out of that spot by now. But the Rudolph is, a classic example of a man who had no money, who really was, as we talked earlier in the program about the least of these. Bob May was the least of these. And he used his own creativity to give his daughter a present that could only be created out of love. Mm-hmm. And a gift given with love comes back magnified to the giver time and time again. And that was never proven any more than with Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. And let's continue the story a little bit, because I kind of opened with this when we opened a while ago. 10 years later or so, 11 years later, the same songwriter, Johnny Marks, is on a beach on the East Coast watching teenagers sing and dance to Elvis songs on the radio. And he gets this idea in the summertime to write this Christmas song. And he sends it to Owen Bradley, a Nashville producer, as a demo record, figuring Owen would give it to a guy named Bobby Helms, because Bobby Helms had this huge hit called Jingle Bell Rock. And Owen Bradley didn't want to give it to Bobby Helms. Instead, he gave it to Brenda Lee, who was at that time 13 years old. She cuts Rockin' Around the Christmas Tree, and it goes nowhere. It sold fewer than 5,000 copies the first year. Didn't go anywhere the second year, but by the third year, Brenda Lee was the hottest female artist in music, had 3 straight #1 songs, and she released it. And it climbed up the charts. It didn't make #1 because Blue Christmas and others kept it out of that spot. But it consistently made #2 for years, including making #2 the last 3 years. And this year, it finally became #1 from 1958 to 2023, sitting there underneath the radar, just at #2. Rockin' Around the Christmas Tree has now been #1 on the Billboard charts for the last 2 weeks. And it's a wonderful little story about perseverance, I guess, that this finally has that #1 hit for a Christmas song. I was being interviewed last year by one of the biggest newspapers in England, and they asked me if Mariah Carey was the Queen of Christmas. And I said, no, I don't think so. I said, I still think Brenda Lee is the Queen of Christmas. So Brenda kind of proved me right today, this week by having the #1 song and knocking Mariah Carey out of the top spot for a while. Johnny Marks also wrote, by the way, Holly Jolly Christmas, which means that this one songwriter has had 3 of the top 10 Christmas songs of all time.
Wow, just fascinating. I love the fact that after 50 years it becomes #1, or after 60 years.
60 years.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah, Brenda was 13 when she recorded. She's 6, so it's 65 years.
Yeah.
65 years it took to climb to #1. Sold millions of records, just never hit #1.
Yeah.
And she's the oldest woman to ever have a #1 song, and it's the longest. Her last #1 song on Billboard charts was 1963. That's the longest span between #1 songs, too.
Yeah. Just to defend myself, when I got this job, I was told there'd be no math. So I'm just trying to... I can't do the math. Yeah. All right. Ace Collins is my guest. We are talking about traditions of Christmas, not only Christmas traditions, but songs. I want to take a little break. When I come back, I want to ask Ace about mistletoe. I think you're going to learn a whole lot about mistletoe when we come back. It's just not for kissing. We'll be right back. How about make a wonderful commitment to yourself this year by reading through the Bible, maybe not even once, but maybe twice. Say things to yourself like, I am going to create a new habit that maybe I have not had in years, and I'm going to commit to it, and I'm going to stick with it. You've always said you wanted to, so how about make it this year where you do it, spending more time in God's Word, and you can do it, and we can help. So all you have to do is get your Bible in a year plan right now. And you can do that right over at myfaithradio.com. Hi, this is Bill. I thought this interview was so good, I wanted you to hear it again. I'm back with enjoy. Ace Collins. Ace, I got a nice text from my wingman, Terry, that said, One of my Christmas traditions, one of my favorites, is listening to Ace Collins talk about history and origins of our most beloved Christmas hymns. My condolences to Mr. Collins and sending my gratitude for the joy he gives to all through his books and stories.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Words like that mean a great deal to me anytime, but especially this year.
That's why I read it. Yep. So let's talk about mistletoe.
The early Christian missionaries who went up 1,000 years ago into Northern Europe were some courageous people. I mean, they were going to some barbaric areas. You know, they were trying to share the gospel to the Druids and the Celts and the Vikings. And they were also incredibly wise. They would look at the various concepts of faith that these people had and the things that had meaning in their world, and they would use them because these people didn't read. They would use these elements that you could pick up, touch, and share the gospel through these natural tracks, I guess you would say. And they noticed that the Vikings, the Druids, and the Celts looked at mistletoe as a very mysterious plant. After all, they kind of believed that trees died in the wintertime. All the leaves fell off, they looked dead, and yet growing out of this dead wood was this green plant that had berries on it, depending on where you were. It was either red berries or white berries. There were some that had a combination of both. And so, to explain the story of Christ, they would pluck this mistletoe off the tree. And by the way, mistletoe was so powerful that if you were a Viking and you met another Viking band that you were enemies with in a forest that had mistletoe, you couldn't fight. You had to find a way to sue for peace. That was part of the legend of the mistletoe plant in that culture. So the missionaries decided this was going to be the plant of peace, and it was going to stand for the Prince of Peace, Jesus. They pointed out that it was growing out of a dead wood. They pointed out that Christ had been crucified on dead wood. They pointed out that the green leaves proved still alive. So the cross did not kill Christ. He rose from the dead. That's what the green represented. The red berries represented his blood. The white represented the purity of Christ. When these people converted to Christianity, they took this meaning so sincerely that they would actually tack a mistletoe plant over their door to indicate that they were of the Christian faith. They would also put mistletoe over babies' beds to remind them of Christ and of prayer and to ask blessings on that child. Well, it came to mean so much that bride and grooms were married underneath mistletoe plants. This is 1,000 years ago now. Wow. They were married underneath mistletoe plants to remind them as long as they had faith, they could sustain themselves through the toughest times, like the bleakest days of winter when the mistletoe plant thrived. And what happens at the end of a marriage ceremony 1,000 years ago? The same thing that happens today. There is a kiss. Over the years, we've lost the original way that it was a track for early missionaries, and it's just the kissing plant now. Mm-hmm. But you know the story behind it. You can still use it the same way the missionaries did all those years ago to explain the life of Christ, the resurrection of Christ, and what that means to the world.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, Ace. A question came in. Have you addressed joy to the world? We have not. And the comment is it... it's not really about Christmas. It's about the second coming, which, of course, is an event many of us are looking forward to. Is that what you understand?
Well, and if you think about that, the way they taught Advent all those years ago, Advent had various stages, and one of the things you looked at was Christ's birth, Christ being crucified, Christ's resurrection, how Christ impacted your life, and how Christ impacted the world. That's the way it was taught all those years ago, and also looking forward to the second coming. And yeah, Isaac Watts, this great hymn writer who wrote Joy to the World, was really inspired as much as anything else. By the way, funny story on Watts. Watts as a teenager, his dad was the preacher in the church. Watts walked up to his father after a service and said, "Sorry, Dad, this is boring." Now, he probably said it in Old English language, but he did. And he said, "What's boring about it?" And you think kids haven't changed? He said, "Well, the music. We sing the same songs every week. We've got the same tunes. We only sing out of the book of Psalms. And his dad said, well, if you can do better, do something. Well, that started a career where he wrote 5,000 hymns. So obviously he knew how to do better, and it changed the course of music as well. And so, he actually studied some Old Testament. Psalms 98, as a matter of fact, is what inspired it, that said, make a joyful noise unto the Lord. He looked at the original birth. He looked at the future coming of Christ and combined all three of those elements and to give us joy to the world. The music we sing it to was actually written by an American, Lowell Mason, and Mason wrote the music, in England, probably almost 50, 60 years after Watts's death. And, so it was written in Savannah, Georgia, the music that we sing it to today. But, it's an interesting fact that this guy was inspired to write music by a father who he had insulted. And the father, in a constructive way, basically channeled that boy's rebellion into something that changed the course of church music for hundreds of years, and is still impacting church music and Christmas music to this day.
Mm-hmm. Ace Collins is my guest, and we're talking about the great traditions behind some of the songs. Ace, what about the song I Saw Three Ships? I always thought that's an interesting song. What can you tell us about that one?
There are all kinds of songs that we sing that are so biblically inaccurate. You think about all of the Christmas carols that have the wise men and the shepherds arriving at the same time.
Right.
And I'm sorry, if the wise man's name was Bart and the shepherd's name was George, they never met each other. The wise men arrived months, maybe even 2 years later.
Mm-hmm.
But that, you look at all these songs, well, they were written by peasants who didn't know the real history. Most of them couldn't read. And Protestant churches, by the way, didn't even start singing, celebrating Christmas until the mid 1800s. They certainly didn't have Christmas music as a part of their lexicon in their hymnals. They pretty much ignored Christmas. The Lutherans didn't, and the Catholics didn't, but most Protestant faiths ignored it. And we'll get into that another time on why that was done. But the peasant who wrote, and we don't know his name, we don't know much about him, but we've got to figure the guy who wrote the song about the ships, who saw the ships as sailing.
Yeah.
And he was picturing an ocean voyage to the Holy Land. He was picturing, so he had to be a seaman.
Okay.
And in his understanding of travel, it was not about donkeys. It was not about burros. It was not about camels. It was about ships. So he basically had all the participants in this incredible pageantry of Jesus' birth arriving via the sea. And he saw the ships a-sailing, and it reminded him of Christmas. Is it biblically accurate? Of course not.
Mm-hmm.
But it was such a great song that it has remained an important part. You think about the tens of thousands of carols that have been written over the years, and it's one of 100 that we still sing.
Yeah, true.
So there was something catchy about it. And it may be because the Brits and the Americans, and that's where this song really took root, were at the time that Christmas music really took off in both countries in the 1800s, were both seafaring people. And the seas were how everything came in and how everything came out. So people who were in those two countries could identify with anything that was sea related, because that's how they got their goods. That's how they got their food. And it's also how they traveled.
Yeah. Ace, I hate to do this to you because we only have like 2 minutes left, but can you go through the 12 days of Christmas in 2 minutes?
No, I can't. But
I didn't think so.
Each one. We don't know.
Let's save that for next time. How's that?
Let's say that.
Yeah,
it's a code. It's a code song. Whether it was a code song written before, or the code was established after it was written or before it was written, we'll never know. But it is a code song.
Okay. How about Yule logs in 90 seconds?
Yule logs are pretty easy. They were supposed to burn 12 days. The families in Old England would cut down the Yule logs. They would pack it with spices. And it represented everything from Christ being crucified on the cross. The sweet spices that were they put in when they burned it for the 12 days represented the sweetness of Jesus and his life. And it was something that was kept going throughout the night to represent the light that came into the world when Jesus was here. It was an important tradition for years. they would always take a splinter from that wood and keep it to light the next Yule log with the next year. And you know, that really, once again, like the first light on the Christmas tree and everything else, represents the light that came into a dark world and what Jesus meant to that world when he arrived.
Yeah. So great to have you on the show. Ace, have a wonderful, busy December, and God bless you with all that you're going through and mourning the loss of your dear Kathy.
Look for joy.
Amen.
And as Kathy would say, tell everybody out there, 143. That's what she signaled and texted everybody, and that meant I love you.
Oh, beautiful. Thanks, Ace. All right, that's our show for the day. Ace Collins has been my guest because he's written 12 books about Christmas. It might be easier just to go to your favorite bookstore. Maybe it's Amazon and just type in his name, Ace Collins, and all his books will show up. Have a great night, everyone. I look forward to our time tomorrow. Thanks for listening. Programming like this is made available through your support. Information available at myfaithradio.com.